there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and this is not the Glatorian that you know. You see, I've collaborated with YouTuber NickOnPlanetRipple, who you may know from his LEGO Rewind series, where he was able to send over some of his custom LEGO Glatorian mods, where he has taken every single one of the LEGO Glatorian sets from 2009 and upgraded them to be the full-on warriors they were meant to be. I am so excited for this video because I have been a longtime fan of his channel and his videos, and for us to work together is a dream come true. And for this video, I'll be taking a look at his mods in comparison to the actual official LEGO sets, sharing what I like, things I might have changed, and the improvements made from one to the other. Let's jump into it right now. Okay, so these are the Glatorian mods by NickOnPlanetRipple. Again, NickOnPlanetRipple is one of my personal favorite LEGO YouTubers who does all sorts of really incredible mocks, mods, story retellings, as well as the amazing LEGO Rewind series, one of my favorite LEGO series to watch on YouTube. And of course, we were able to work together where he sold me his Glatorian mods so I could showcase them here on the channel and even do some comparisons against the official sets, because these are pretty drastically different. Now, in order of arguably most lore important to least lore important, we have Matui, Akar, Kina, Gresh, Galu, a Scrawl, Strak, Vorox, Metis, Ranu, Stronius, Terex, a Zesk, Vastus all the way in the back there, and then finally Harduk and Malum are here as well. This makes up pretty much the entirety of the large-scale canister sets wave, all 6 from the original Glatorian series, as well as all 6 Glatorian legends, as well as 4 representative Agori, especially the most important ones he wanted to cover. This is super cool because, obviously in lore, the Glatorian are partially biomechanical, partially organic, which means that they would have more organic pieces than other typical Bionicle sets and models, and Nick has done a really good job of trying to have that point come across in all the models here. You've got all sorts of pieces integrated in that didn't originate from the Bionicle original G1 line, like CCBS, as well as almost fabric or fur looking elements attached onto the sides. You have system pieces, parts that are made to fill in the gaps, transparent elements to represent different bits and pieces of biomechanical hardware, and all sorts of really great designs that have, in my opinion, a really nice blend of Bionicle G1 as well as more modern sensibilities and modern pieces to really capture the characters in the way they were meant to be seen. But I figured, let's go ahead and start off and do some direct comparisons, taking an in-depth look at every single one of the figures one by one. So here is the modified version of the Fire Tribe, and of course, the set counterparts. And it is super cool seeing these side by side. Of course, we have Akar, Malum, and Ranu making up the entirety of the Fire Tribe representation here, and let's dive into some individual comparisons with this group. We're actually going to start off with the smallest character here, Ranu, and one of the most drastic changes that Nick has managed to make to the Agori is making them a little bit taller and giving them a lot more articulation. Since the Glatorian are basically supposed to be partially organic beings, especially with more organic components than the standard characters, he has actually been able to use CCBS to a really great degree to kind of blend that organic and biomechanical feel. One of my favorite details here is that one of my big complaints about the original Agori was that they basically pretty much just had plain chests, like no armor, just one single plain color, and dark gray is a pretty boring color to have for the entirety of the torso of a character. So what he's done is he's actually taken some armor elements and attached them onto the front of Ranu here, giving him a heart light in the chest, really making it feel a little bit more unique in the way that the armor blocking is done. He's also changed around the types of armor Ranu is wearing, having some asymmetrical pieces with some CCBS fur elements, which I feel worked out really well to make it kind of feel just completely distinct from the actual character, especially because some of these types of elements here, especially in the arms, almost look like they are partially organic, so I think the inclusion of the fur element here really just adds a lot to the detail of the character itself. Moving on to the back, you have a nice addition, super simple change, but just the addition of a dark red foot element to armor up the back really make it feel like a much more armored up and sturdy character. And also, I love what they did with the staff here, making it feel like an actual staff and keeping it distinct from the Vakama Hordika Fire Spitter Blade Claw here, which I think is a really nice touch. It makes it almost feel kind of like its own weapon and its own tool in and of itself. And lastly, in order to increase the height here, Nick has added on the CCBS friction add-on to the necks of all of the characters, which I think does work for some of them. For some of the other characters, it does feel like the neck, for me at least, is a little bit too tall, but I totally understand why that decision was made, and I think it looks really good. They really do complement each other, and now it almost kind of feels like these are just two different members of the Fire Tribe, which is something I think is really cool, because I'm all for building up diversity in my Agori ranks. But now, let's set aside Ranu and take a look at the next character. And next up, we have Malum. Malum, as I kind of am going to allude to later on in this video, is one of my favorite ever Glatorian designs. I just thought Malum was so cool when he came out in 2009. I loved kind of the hunchback positioning and how diverse and unique he was compared to the standard Glatorian. Of course, since every single character has been made a lot taller for these revamps, Malum is taller, and yet he is still one of the shorter revamps, as you saw in the beginning. Obviously, there have been some updates made, especially to the way the shoulder armor is done. One of the downsides of the original Malum is that, while I think it was really cool to use the Kalma foot element as actual armor, it did kind of clash with the front armor piece here and felt a little bit awkward in the way that it was just facing the front, and Nick has fixed that by instead mounting it on the side, but just beefing up the upper arms to such a significant degree that you have this foot armor mounted on the side of a standard shoulder armor, and you even have some additional Throwbots feet elements in dark red on the top there just to add a lot more armor plating to the character. One of my favorite things here is the addition of almost like a waist cape style of thing with fur elements on the side here, which kind of allude to his origins and his lore significance as being the current ruler of the Vorox, so obviously he kind of has these more animalistic and tribal details to him. Same with the underside of the arms, just feeling very armored up, and that fur almost kind of looks like fire as well, adding in an extra layer of depth to the character. Of course, one of the great small additions, but one that I feel elevates it significantly, are the usage of these 1x1 little transparent round tile elements, which just feel like there's fire going all around his body, and especially when you go on even to the back of the character, you do have it fully armored up on the back here with a dark red armor piece and fur on top of that, which just makes it that much more special, and I really love the revamp here. Out of all the revamps, I feel like this one really succeeds in capturing the soul and the iconography of the original character and being able to be a fully playable, fully posable type of model, fully playable and posable, but still just kind of doing its own thing and making it very clear that this is a completely reimagined and revamped version of the character itself. I think it's really cool to have them side by side, but now let's move on to the next character. And next up for the Fire Tribe, and last up, we have Akar, the Glatorian. Akar is one of the main characters in the entirety of the Bionicle 2009 and 2010 run, and it definitely makes sense that he would get a significant revamp here. Now, unfortunately my copy of Akar is missing just a couple of pieces here and there, but you get the point of what the actual original set looks like. What Nick has done with Akar is, for one, the sword is something I really do appreciate the way that it's been done, because of course you have the slightly better fire piece in my opinion than just the plain orange. You have the one that was introduced for Stars Tahu, which kind of has a gradient of red to orange, but you also have a transparent red piece being utilized here that originated from the Super Battle Droid Technic set in 2002 to allow it to feel like the fire is actually sprouting from the handle itself, and you even have an underside of the sword element, kind of a pommel here at the bottom, which just makes the sword feel that much more complete. The character itself is surprisingly, on first glance, doesn't look like it's changed that much, but I think that is the sign of a good revamp, because as you zoom closer and closer in on the details, you will see just how reimagined the torso has been. The torso itself has been completely bulked up, You can see Technic elements and components making up the inside of the torso here, like they're just Technic lift arms inside of the torso to really make it feel that much more bulky. There's orange recolored Vorox eyes, and I feel like this just really fills in the gaps of the original quite skinny waist that he had and makes him feel like much more of a hardened gladiator with a lot of muscle behind his movements, which I think is really cool. He also, like many of the other revamps here, has a bit of a waist cape with the orange of Vorox armor, which I think works very, very well for the character itself. Spikes have been added to the feet here, and actually spikes have been added all around, kind of an homage to these spike elements being used for the side of the armor. And of course, he has been given the shield which he wielded in the Legend Reborn, which is kind of inspired by the Ranu shield, which you saw earlier. On the back here, he has a dark red foot element being used as the back armor, and even the back of the legs are fully armored up with Bionicle elements on the back here, making this feel like a fully complete figure. And even you can see Vorox teeth on the back. Every single detail has been added to make this feel like a much more bulky character. Akkar, color scheme-wise, was honestly never my personal favorite character. I much preferred the dark red and the kind of transparent orange and heat orange seen on Malum, but I do think this is a really good revamp. It absolutely captures the essence of Akkar, and the best part of it for me is probably that little yellow heart light in the center, which is kind of tying back to how the characters were depicted in the movies themselves. But now let's move on to the next tribe. Enter the Water Tribe. We have Teryx, Beryx, and Kina, and you can see all three members of the Water Tribe right here alongside their revamps. Now, these were some of my favorite characters color scheme-wise, especially Teryx. I thought the blue and dark gold was one of the coolest color schemes ever for a Bionicle, giving him a very regal feel, and now, let's jump into some direct comparisons. Okay, so here we have the Agori Beryx, and out of all the Agori revamps, this is probably the most one-to-one compared to the original set. Mine is missing the sword at the moment and the tube, but you can picture what it's supposed to be because it basically was exactly this, and otherwise there are very few changes made to Beryx himself. In fact, the limbs have all remained the same, the feet have been changed to metal blue, which I think is a nice touch, again from that Technic Super Battle Droid, but otherwise the changes here are pretty minimal. No extra articulation has been given, but mostly because there aren't a lot of pieces that exist in the medium blue color, so I understand they had to kind of work with what they had. However, the addition of a Heartlight has been added, which I do feel is a really nice touch, and definitely makes the color scheme pop a little bit more and be broken up a bit more as well. And then, onto the back here, you have one of the additional components from Kina's set being used as kind of a backpack or maybe some back armor on there, which just makes it feel a little bit more bulked up and feel a bit more unique compared to some of the other Agori. Since there's not that many changes on this one, this isn't one of the ones I was super excited about because obviously it's almost the same exact character with just a few minor updates, but it is still cool to see it done in this same style, and let's move on to the next model. So, our next Glatorian here is, of course, Teryx. And Teryx is easily, again, as I mentioned, one of my favorite Bionicle sets that honestly has ever come out, mostly because of that incredible color scheme. I just love that dark blue and gold. Now, what's really cool, and it's a minor detail, but I really appreciate it, is to make him stand out a bit more from Kina, Nick has chosen to give this version of Teryx darker green eyes and a darker green heartline, which also corresponds to, of course, the darker green shade of the Baraki eye being used as the heartlight there, which just makes him feel a little bit more distinct, and I actually like that color being used for him a lot more. Now, Teryx here, of course, has a very similar style of fighting as the original set, where he has these kind of dual blades, but what is really cool is that a lot more details have been added in terms of bulking up the gold in the color scheme and making him feel a little bit more armored up and regal compared to his predecessor. Here you can see the waistcape being done utilizing these gold CCBS elements, which I think is super cool, and of course, you again have more bulk being added into the torso itself. If you look on the way that the torso is assembled, there are little bits of Baraki eyes, which are kind of factored into the torso itself, to just add a bit more bulk into the way it's built up. And of course, as you rotate it towards the back here, you actually have a little bit of extra kind of transparent green and tubes sticking out of the side here, making it feel like that might be some sort of a breathing tube or capacity. And it's a very similar backpack to Vorox, which I think is really nice, keeping some sort of visual consistency amongst all the members of the Water Tribe. Even small details like the addition of gold spurs on the side of the boots here really make it feel like you have that gold permeating all of the color scheme itself. And then of course, the armor has been updated, especially on the upper arms, to really utilize some of those Bionicle G2 elements, as well as some gold feet from Brutaka, some of the rarer elements used here, to make him feel just that much more special as a warrior. Overall, I think the updates to Terex are really great. The only thing for me is that I feel like maybe the waist cape could have been improved a little bit to just change the silhouette of the model itself, and honestly I kind of could have done without it, but overall, I'm really happy with how this is done. It feels really nicely armored up compared to the original, and now let's move on to the next model. Of course, next up in the Water Tribe is one of the main characters here, and that is Kina. Kina is one of the primary characters that goes on the quest with Matui, and so the revamp is almost completely redesigned compared to the original, and I think it's done really nicely. Kina was also a really interestingly built character, especially for her time, because it's for being a standard Glatorian canister set. I actually was really impressed with how they did Kina, making a foot or leg element as part of the entire torso, and then having a custom-built Technic frame on the back to just make her feel a little bit skinnier and really push the kind of female warrior aesthetic. Nick has pushed that even more here, utilizing some of the exact same pieces, which we saw on Kina previously, but also just adding in a lot more articulation and posability with this model. Finally, that actual leg joint has been used for waist articulation, so you can actually swivel the waist a little bit and bend it back and forth, which I think just adds a lot more character to the model itself. Of course, the trident has been updated as well, utilizing some metallic blue elements to lengthen the trident itself. And then the armor on the side is super nice because you actually have a possibility to pose the side waist armor utilizing these special Kina armor pieces, which typically were just affixed to the side of the legs on the original set. Even going on to the back, I really love how you have the layers and layers of armor here, making it feel like these are armor plates that kind of shift and bend and move with each other. It's a really nice touch for a model like this. And then even the feet have been added with just some minor details here, like the addition of the 1x1 medium blue flat 1x1 tiles, which I think is a really nice touch, and just making it feel that much more armored up in general. Kina, say what you will about her character in the movies, but I do think that this revamp does justice to the character, and one of my favorite details are the inclusion of these shorter style of lightsaber blades. Here you can see the transparent blue just adding in there is just a little bit of a detail, kind of reflected by the transparent blue stud here, that they've used to actually attach the front and back armor pieces on. Whereas this piece, as you can see, is attached by that lightsaber bar there. So that is a really nice touch. I think that the updates made to Kina are really solid, and let's now move on to the next tribe. Okay, now we're getting to the really good stuff. These are the set versions of the Jungle Tribe from Bionicle 2009, and here are the revamps. The Jungle Tribe members were some of the best that they ever did for the green-colored Bionicles, especially Gresh, being one of the all-time most iconic Bionicle sets in the color scheme and the weaponry, and so, let's dive in to all of these revamps right now. So here is the Agori Tarduk, and this one, in contrast to the last Agori we looked at, has quite a significant change done to him. And I really appreciate the changes made here because the original set, which you can see right here, unfortunately didn't really have the possibility to stand up on the back legs. He was a four-legged character, which I think is an interesting idea to do for an Agori, but it also meant that in other forms of media like the movie where it's depicted with this Agori standing up, it just didn't really work out or make sense, and so Nick has fixed that by still keeping the animalistic kind of design and tendencies, but making it possible for him to stand on two legs. I love the usage of the Borak foot here. It feels just a little bit more like an animal or a creature as opposed to the standard foot, which I think does a really good job of making Top Duck feel like he is kind of more in that creature sort of feeling here. Of course, the upper arms are pretty much unchanged, but what has been done is that they've added the addition of these dark green CCBS armor elements, which I think work out really well for the character, and even added the Gresh spikes on the back to mimic these spikes on the back of the original model. Of course, a glowing neon orange heart light has been added. He even has a bit of a tool of his own here. And then as you rotate to the back, there's the addition of a Paraka foot to just make it feel more armored up. And all of these are really nice additions. I love the improvements made to Tarduk, and I definitely feel like the modded version is, for me, the definitive version of the character, and it just works so well. The color scheme is more balanced with lime green spikes and then lime green lower legs here, and it just feels a lot more unique and distinct compared to the original model. But now, let's move on to the next set of warriors, and that brings us to some of my personal favorites, and that is, of course, Gresh. Now, Gresh was always one of my favorite Bionicle sets. Growing up, I absolutely loved the color scheme, the design, the sensibilities of how they actually were able to depict a jungle warrior like Gresh, and then this revamp has just taken things absolutely to the next level. So Gresh always, in my opinion, had a really solid color scheme. The lime and the dark green just worked so well together. And it was really cool seeing these specialized weapon components being used for Gresh, which really made him feel alive and more of a jungle aesthetic. Now, what Nick has done is added just a lot more posability and character to the model. Instead of, say, the upper legs just being using this spike element as armor, kind of feeling a little bit under-armored and skinny, what he's done is he's actually really bulked them up with CCBS components being used here, but still included these spike elements as a bit of a waist cape for the character itself, which I think is really cool because you can actually start to pose that however way you want. The addition of vines on the side of the character legs is a really nice touch. Same with the green spikes, which just makes it feel that much more unique compared to the other Jungle, Agori, and the other green-colored Bionicle sets. And of course, one thing I really love is the way the shoulder armor is done. These are now mounted on ball joints, so you can actually angle the shoulder armor in whatever way that you want, giving him a very unique looking character and detailing for the silhouette of the character itself. Of course, you could kind of wiggle him back and forth on the OG model, but this is just a significant improvement. The Heartlight in orange looks really good. I really like the addition of the Heartlight there, as he's done with most of the characters here. And on the back, you can just see just how bulked up this has been with the addition of just little bits and pieces of Technic on the back torso there to make it just feel more detailed in the way that it's built up. And then even this final black spike utilizing a Hero Factory element to really great use here. I really love the inclusion of that element because it feels like it fits right in with the other three-pronged spikes, which is pretty perfect. Overall, this is almost the perfect revamp to me. It retains the look and feel and kind of character of the original model, but just makes it so much more dynamic, so much more filled in and fleshed out, and that is something I love about the character. But let's move on to the next model. So the next model here is, of course, Vastus. Now, Vastus, I always had mixed feelings on, I remember, especially growing up when I was a kid, about how he was designed, because I feel like coming after such a strong set like Gresh, Vastus was just fine. The lime green and dark green color scheme was cool, but I felt like there just wasn't something right in the way the color scheme was blocked, and, well, I know exactly what the problem is now. It's because since he used an inverted dark green torso, there was no color blocking on the torso. The entirety of the torso is pretty much just dark green. Well, that problem has been fixed here with a lime green torso, which I feel like actually really improves the look and feel of the character and makes him stand out from Gresh himself. I love the addition of the changes in the color scheme, having the lime green feel like additional armor being placed on, so you have the lime green snake armor here, and you also have lime green kind of additional Bionicle stars armor on the side, but then the inside and the actual material of the character is dark green, which really makes the color scheme feel a lot more congruent and tied together. Of course, The staff has been improved as well, which I think is really nice, especially the inclusion of some of these additional elements to really bulk up the staff here, which is very, very cool. And I also really like how the snake armor pieces have been mounted at the side on an angle here, which really just allows you to bulk up the arms with more CCBS elements while still retaining that original, very unique armor piece that he had. Really, the only downside to me is I really did like the usage of the Hordika legs here. I thought that it just added a lot more character to the original, and they've chosen to swap this one out, which makes sense because this is a taller piece, but I still would have loved to see this piece being used for maybe something like the arms, but it's just a minor thing, and overall, really a big fan of how this was done. The back is pretty simple, just a very standard type of foot being used on the back here to armor it up, but it works, it's pretty effective, and I do like the changes made, especially for the waist cape here being done with the stars green pieces, which I just feel works so well for a character like this. But now, it's time to move on to the next tribe, and we are halfway through. Here is the Ice Tribe of Equinox. We have Strak, Galu, and Metis. Here are the original sets, and here are the revamps. Growing up, the Ice Bionicle sets were always my favorites, and while I do feel like some other sets in the Glatorian wave did outshine these ones, like Gresh being a big standout, I just love the aesthetics of the Ice Tribe and how elemental they feel, especially the gigantic Strak Ice, which is one of my favorite Bionicle weapons ever. So now, let's dive into the new and old revamps versus original sets of the Ice Tribe. Starting off, we have the traitorous Metis. Now, one thing that I love about how Metis has been upgraded from his original design is the addition of the CCBS transparent blue elements, really tying him into the element of ice. The other really cool improvement here is the usage of the Nuju Hordika blade, which I feel like is a great improvement that feels so much more icy than the standard blade that he did eventually get in the set itself. Obviously, there aren't a lot of changes made to the torso. There is just a minor update with the Hero Factory claw bear paw element being used to armor up the back there, which I think is a nice touch, just making him feel a bit more distinct. But overall, the big difference for Metis is the inclusion of these really nice icy components, which I feel like help tie him into the aesthetic details of the rest of the tribe, especially the transparent blue elements used on some of the other sets. Of course, the added benefit is now Metis has knee and elbow articulation, which is something the original one did not have, and it's always very cool to see that being used in a smaller Bionicle model. But now, let's move on to the next Glatorian. So, the first Glatorian up here is Strak. And Strak has such a unique design. For being kind of just like a one-off character who doesn't really do much, Strak is a really uniquely designed villain or kind of adversary Glatorian here, and I just love the way that they depicted him in both the original set and of course in the remake as well. One of the most unique things about the original set was the hunchback design, how the torso was literally held at a 90-degree angle. And Nick has pushed that design even further by allowing you to actually articulate the way it is hunched and the waist articulation here, which is such a nice detail. I feel like with Nick's mods, every single proportion is exaggerated. Everything feels a little bit more almost cartoony, but in a good way, in the term that it's been exaggerated beyond its normal proportions. The neck has been elongated to really emphasize the hunched back. And of course, you have all sorts of really nice details being factored into the mod to make it feel more unique as an actual model. One of my favorite things that is a common trend throughout these Glatorian mods is that you're not just using the single armor element, like Strak is using the single ice armor element here to make up the side of the arm. Instead, it is mounted on the side at a positionable angle, which allows you to really bulk up the inside of the arm itself and make these feel more like additional armor on add-ons. So of course, as you can see with Strak here, the ice armor piece even has some underside white claws, which are super cool to really make sure that it's fully filled in and dense. Even the axe itself has a bit of a pommel being used at the end here, where it shows he's kind of holding it in the middle of its staff, which is super, super cool. Love the addition of these little transparent blue elements too, to just make it feel that much more alive. And of course, the shield has been upgraded. The original set didn't even come with a shield, but I upgraded my own set with this particular model here. But the OG has been upgraded with even a central element being used to mount the shield to protect the center of the hand as well, which is very, very nice. One of my favorite details here in usage to the building techniques on the torso is the use of these dark blue Bionicle hand pieces, which I feel like kind of just fit the torso perfectly in the way they just shape around the armor. It is just a really nice and simple touch, but one that I feel just adds a lot more bulk and weight to the character itself. And of course, zooming outwards to the legs, you have the great addition of the Chima and the Hero Factory fur elements being used on the side for the waist cape here, which I think just works perfectly for the ice essential element of this design, because of course you have the spikes here, you've got spikes here, everything just works so perfectly. Strak was always one of my favorite designs. I think Strak and Gresh are my two favorites out of the Glatorian wave, and that's why I'm absolutely biased here. I really love this revamp, but I think it works super well, especially compared to the original, and it's super cool seeing just the upgraded version of Strak. But now, let's move on to the next pair of Glatorian, and that is, of course, Galu. Galu is an interesting character, because he never really appeared in the story proper until the Yesterday Quest story serials, where he actually had a much bigger focus. This is pretty timely because we're literally running the voting process, or about to be running the voting process for the Bionicle Ord fanon contest very soon, so it's kind of perfect that Galu is also showcased here. Galu, I think, was never quite as interesting of a build as Strak was, because obviously he is more of a standard Inika build, especially for the original set, but I do like Nick's attempts to make him feel a little bit more unique, from the inclusion of just little bits and pieces of detailing like the extra little transparent blue piece to bulk in the side armor, and of course the chest element being elongated outwards to add the addition of Technic axles and pins and lift arms on the inside to make it feel more bulked up. All of those are just really nice additions to make this feel like more of a bulky warrior. Now, of course, on the backside, it's pretty simple. You just have a couple of spikes on the back, like the usage of the wing elements as the waist cape, which I feel like add a bit more of an elegant flair to a warrior like Galu, who has a very unique design in the way that he's done. But my hands down favorite aspect of the introductions made to this model is the usage of the Prydac feet. This, for whatever reason, just screams ice character to me, and I feel like it works so well for the character to just have this more elongated foot design. It just makes him feel more distinct from the other characters, and despite the fact that there haven't been a lot of other changes in the way the Glatorian here has been designed, I just love the inclusion of the feet here to make it feel that much more unique as a character. That's all for the Ice Tribe, and now let's move on to a bit of a mix between Matui and the Vorox. Is Matui and a Vorox plus a Zesk, and then of course you have the revamped characters. Nick has chosen to just revamp the two main Glatorian, which totally makes sense because I feel like those are the important ones to cover, and this is quite an interesting one because I technically will be comparing revamp to revamp because, officially speaking, I have modified my original Matui set based on a couple of different inspirations online, namely Bob the Doctor 27 posted a really cool version of Matui on Instagram that I absolutely had to use as inspiration and kind of one-to-one actual updates to my version of Matui, and I have used a 3D printed sword by King K, which is supposed to perfectly depict the sword from the movies. So obviously, this isn't the official set, but instead you get a chance to see two different revamps and two different styles of updating the character next to each other. The Vorox, however, has been virtually unchanged from the original set, so we can jump into that right now. So I did not expect it, but the Vorox has kind of become a sleeper hit for me in terms of Nick's mods. Obviously, there are a lot more exciting sets and more flashy color schemes, but I feel like Nick has totally nailed the characterization of the Vorox in this ultimate update here, which just makes it leagues better than the set. You see, with other models like Gresh or even with Strak, you're starting with already a pretty good set and then just making it better. But here, you're starting with a set that honestly was never that interesting, kind of has weird color scheme blocking with the reverse torso being all black, as well as just not a ton of interesting things going on with the model itself. And you're converting it into something that feels just that much more bulked up and unique compared to what we eventually got as the set. The biggest update for me here are the usage of the digitigrade legs. I feel like aesthetically speaking, those add a lot in terms of the way this looks. And I love the integration of different bits and pieces of chain, suggesting that maybe this was a chained Vorox that escaped from the Scrawl. You even have the smaller Technic panels being used to fill in the gaps. It is just so cool how it's done. Of course, to have that hunched back animalistic look, you do have the addition of a movable waist here, which is a really nice touch, and I love that you actually are able to do that. And even the Thornax launcher here has the addition of the silver Krika skull, which I think is a really nice touch because it feels like just one more of the blades that it can use to fight. Of course, the torso has been fully bulked up, and my favorite part is the addition of the tan foot here, which just absolutely fixes one of my original problems with the original set, which is the torso just being predominantly all black with no additional style of color scheme being done for it. And then, of course, you have the upper shoulder armor of the Vorox armor here being used to kind of cascade perfectly over the shoulders of the arms. It is just so good the way that it's done. And, of course, you do have the Stinger Tail, which is basically unchanged. In fact, my favorite part of the Vorox in the original set was the Stinger Tail because of how articulatable and fun it was to play with. But of course, here you actually have a much larger reach for it, as well as the option to have this additional armor piece being used. The only minor change here is just the addition of this style of attachment piece being used instead of the standard hand, which I think does a really good job at making it feel more like a continuous tail rather than a tail sticking up and then bending straight at a 90-degree angle. Almost every single aspect of the original set has been significantly improved, and that is why I feel like this is the definitive Vorox. You have a really nice chain around the neck as well to suggest that it, again, once was an escaped prisoner. There's just so much detail packed into the way the model's done, and there's even attention to detail paid in the color of the Technic pins being tan here, which I just really appreciate, making it feel like a character unto itself. But now let's take a look at the one that everybody wants to see, and of course, that is Matui. Now again, as I mentioned, my version of Matui has been pretty significantly upgraded in almost every way, to the point where it absolutely is not fair to say this is a comparison to the original set. Obviously, what I've done with my version is I've just really bulked it up in all the ways that I could, so I've added in a lot of different system elements on the inside. I've even added in some system elements wedged in between here to add some more bulk to the character, added these two pieces in, added this in. I have changed the way the armor is mounted to make it feel more bulked up. So there's been a lot of changes here, and of course you do have even some more additional components that I was able to utilize sticking into the side here to just add on to the color scheme. And of course I've added a heart light as well. And all of these are thanks to, as I mentioned, Bob the Doctor 27 and his designs on Instagram. So obviously it's not fair to say this is a comparison to the set, it's a comparison to another mock. But in terms of comparisons, I think it is really cool to see how different people went with the design of this. You now have the option to change the angle of Matui's spike elements here, just in the way that they're mounted. Of course, there is the addition of the CCBS elements being used here, as well as the upper leg here, where you have the same style of armor piece being used on the top, but of course you do have it mounted here as well. There's just all sorts of smaller details added, like the eyes on the click shield here, which I think is really nice, that it actually does have those eyes factored in. And if you're not going to 3D print an element, this is probably the best way that you could actually depict his curved sword from the movie. It works out surprisingly well, and I actually really like it as a purist solution to just having that original sword piece. Of course, the armor has been extended further outwards to add more bulk to the character, and even on the back there is an armor piece added on to fully bulk up the back here, making this feel incredibly fleshed out and complete, while my mod of the set is pretty much maintained on focusing the overall aesthetic of the set and just adding in some small different details here and filling in some of the gaps. This upgraded version is a big improvement in terms of the size and scale and making it feel like it fits its own character. They're just two completely different styles, but it is really cool to compare the two. And now let's move on to the final villainous faction of the Glatorian. Of course, the final faction to cover here are the Scrawl. The Scrawl are some of the most unique Bionicle villain characters, and I just love the way they've been modified. Of course, here we have the standard Scrawl, and then of course we have the Elite Stronius, and in the center I just have one of the Agori here, which of course was not revamped for this particular section, but I just wanted to showcase it alongside the other ones just to have the complete tribe. But now, let's jump in to the Scrawl Warrior. One of my favorite things about the original LEGO Scrawl set was just how unique the torso was. As you can see, the entire torso was mounted at a 90-degree angle, actually pivoting backwards, pushing the head forwards and pulling the arms back, and that is exactly what's been done here, except it now feels a lot more fleshed out and fully in-depth armored as it should. So again, the Scrawl has been upgraded with digitigrade legs here, which I think is a nice touch. Given how strange this creature is compared to the other Glatorian, I think it makes sense to make them have a bit more of an animalistic design. You of course have the option to swivel and articulate the waist here, as with many of the hunchback characters, which I think is really cool. But one of the most important updates made by the mod here is filling out the back with an armor piece, making it almost a triangular design. This to me is the single best update made to the design itself, where you have pretty much the exact same piece, a 90-degree piece being used to mount it on the back, but now you have a CCBS armor piece to really just fully close up that gap there, which works surprisingly well. It's actually shocking how well that works. Of course, this is added on to the fact that you have these additional CCBS armor pieces being used to make the side of the way the torso is done itself, which I think is a really, really nice touch, and that gives you pretty much the perfect torso design for the Scrawl itself. The other thing, which again is really nice, is that instead of just using the standard blade piece for the upper shoulder armor, you have the blade mounted on the back and then fully armored up pieces on the front here, which just make it feel a lot more special. Of course, you have that razor blade shield, which can actually spin up for the Scrawl map, and the blade is almost unchanged because it already was really good. It's hard to beat perfection when it comes to the Scrawl blade. Just a few minor changes in the color scheme, but that is done really nicely. Good addition of the heart light there, and of course, I do also really like the usage of the black piston add-on G2 element, which of course came in the Star Wars K2SO, which I think just works out really well for the character. Overall, this is one of the revamps which I feel like takes the original concept and spirit behind the design and just makes it so much better in the way that it's been built. I am really happy with the design, and I definitely am super pleased with this model in general. But now, let's move on to the final Glatorian, the elite Scrawl warrior Stronius. Now unfortunately my copy of Stronius had a piece go missing in shipment, so there is supposed to be another Knights Kingdom armor piece there, but you can just kind of picture it there, and I'm sure I can just order that piece off of Bricklink to make it complete. But otherwise, this is a pretty radical change. While Stronius, as an original set, was always a goofy little guy, as you can see here, he was a very kind of crouched down, hunchback sort of character, almost like a dwarf style of character. You can really see that that has been mostly translated to this newer version of the model, but Nick has gone in a bit of a different direction, making him feel a little bit more armored up, like a large-scale brute and not quite as short and bulky as the original model, which I think has pros and cons. I definitely do like the original stature of the first Stronius set, but this is just so radically different and so much more updated that it's hard to dislike the changes being made. One of the coolest changes for me is the addition of extra armor pieces on the side of the waist, which I think just work out super well. It's the same armor piece introduced for the set, used for the torso and upper arms, but they've also included it as a waist armor here, which just works so well. And I also love the way that you can even angle the waist armor on the top here, which just looks super good, or the shoulder armor here, adding on this extra spike sticking out. That design of kind of like a triangular design rather than just having the armor fold downwards on the model, I think is a really cool touch. And of course, the arms have been armored up accordingly to really make it feel more special in the way that it's done. Even the club has been fully bulked up, where you can see it's not just the standard club piece that they introduced, it's also having these extra add-on elements to protect the hand and make it feel like more of a weapon that is easy to be wielded. And of course, as you rotate onto the back, there are all sorts of spikes being included on the sides, on the back, Knights Kingdom spike armor being used, spikes on the back here, even the spikes on the upper part of the armor, just making it feel fully armored up, like almost like a living wrecking ball come to life. This is the final revamp, and I think it is a really good one to end on because it shows just how different two interpretations of the same character can be, and overall, it has been an absolute treat showcasing these revamps. And these are not the last ones, because there will be a Thornatus V9 revamp coming very soon. So stay tuned for that, and that about sums up all of the individual revamps. Let's now take a look at the entire team. Okay, and with that, we have summed up our look at Nick's Bionicle Glatorian mods. Let me know in the comments which one of these is your favorite, which ones would you maybe modify more yourselves, and have you chosen to modify your own Glatorian sets, kind of like what I already have done a little bit with mine. I think my favorite here out of the bunch is, honestly, I'm biased because I always love the design of the character, but Malum is amazing, and I also feel like he did a really good job with Gresh as well, though all of them are really fantastic. And so, that sums up this special edition of Bionicle Fan and Reviews. It is kind of like a 16-in-1 Bionicle Fan and Review, so I hope you enjoyed. Thanks so much for watching, and let me know what other Bionicle reviews you want to see up next. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at Nick's Glatorian mods. Once again, thank you to Nick for letting me do this video deep dive into what you've done to improve the Glatorian in almost every single possible way. I love the way these play because they're using some more modern pieces and CCBS, but they're still feeling like they're tied directly into the story, and they have so much life and character to them, even more so than the original sets. They are just so cool, and of course, I'm curious in the comments, what else do you want me to do with figures like this? That's all for this video. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon, and bye for now.